Cam Wilson here. Twitch streamer, internet reporter, TGIFer. Very excited to be with you here today. Thank you all for joining. The big story today, of course, has been Scomo'S big fat backflip on electric vehicles. Let me first quickly talk to the actual poll. We'll just go through the quick details before we get into the good stuff. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has denied his support for electric vehicles is a massive backflip, as critics say the government's new $250 million strategy won't stop Australia from lagging behind the rest of the world. The government's plan, released on Tuesday, has prompted concern from industry advocates who say a lack of new subsidies or tax incentives means EVs remain too expensive for most Australians. The government's policy does not include any official target for electric vehicle sales, but projects that 30% of all new cars sold by 2030 will either be electric or hybrid. So there's not that much meat in there. The real reason why this got so much attention today is because a big part of the 2019 campaign was Scott Morrison saying that Bill Shorten, with his EV policy, electric vehicle policy, which was very similar to this one, was going to kill the weekend. Here is a clip of him being asked about that.
So you can't honestly say you weren't attacking electric vehicles and it was just Bill Shorten's policy?
No, I can, because that's true.
In 2019 on 2GB, you said, what about all these charging stations? How much is that going to cost? I mean, if you have an electric car and you live in an apartment, are you going to run the extension cord down from your fourth floor window? Yet now, today, you're focusing on infrastructure. So you have to admit it's a fairly big conversion you've made.
No, what we're seeing here is a massive change in the technology over the last few years.
3 years.
Yes, a massive change.
So, I mean, that was literally two and a half years ago. And not that much has changed. I mean, it's not like we've... Ashling 4 says, is Scomo an Elon stan now? Maybe that's the case. Maybe he's been Elon pilled. But technology hasn't really changed that much.
There's been a massive change
we had
in
Teslas
technology
back then?
over the last few years, and particularly when it comes to hydrogen. And hydrogen is a big game changer for Australia. Hydrogen is it's a solution for Australia, because some years ago, when the Labor Party was going to force you to go and move to a vehicle for which the technology hadn't arrived at where we are at now and where it will go into the future, they wanted to force your choice and make taxpayers subsidise it. Now, we just had a different view. Technology's moving, it will continue to move forward. Australians will make those decisions. What I'm opposed to is forcing Australians to do things, forcing them out of their jobs. I want to let Australians make their own choices and have policies to support them. Electric vehicles were part of our policies at the last election. They just weren't the Labor Party's policies, because the Labor Party's policies, as I say, they just always want to tell you what to do, because they love telling.
So there we go. I mean, look, it's just like... I've spoken before. You guys have heard me mention about this, like this really interesting thing that Scott Morrison does, where when push comes to shove, when he is feeling pressure to do something, when someone is saying, well, you should be doing this, you got to do this, he has this incredible way of saying, oh, I'm the most powerless person in the world. And in fact, that's actually a good thing. You know, I let these things happen. I'm just I'm a daggy dad. There's nothing I can do. I'm just, an average Australian. I couldn't possibly intervene in the climate apocalypse. I couldn't possibly. I don't want to tell you what to do, which is, by the way, what governments do every single minute of the day. The technology aspect of it is so interesting because it fits into his passiveness, this performative powerlessness, where he's saying, I'm not doing anything. It's just that technology is getting better. It's just happening on its own, as if he doesn't control all of these levers that determine what technology gets developed. Australia's R&D since the coalition government got in 2013 has dropped. So, I mean, that's having an effect on something like technology. The subsidies that we give to fuel and other different fossil fuels, that is also affecting these things. That's again another aspect of it that is it's just quite like when Scott Morrison wants to be, he is just so good at saying that we should not do anything. And in fact, you know, it would be unreasonable for us to do anything. I can't do anything. Which is it's just crazy. Here's him back in 2019 talking about it, which was really, really like not that long ago.
On electric vehicles, the government's funding new fast charging stations for over $6 million
Yeah.
arena.
We are.
And in October, Angus Taylor said that they can charge a car in 15 minutes.
New technology, not existing technology.
And how is what he said about different...
Yeah, no, Bird Labor's been pushing this around today. There's two things. We don't have a problem with electric vehicles. In fact, we've been facilitating the development of the infrastructure and the new technologies. What Angus Taylor was talking about was technologies that at present are not in general use. What Bill Shorten was talking about was how long it takes to actually charge up a vehicle today. And he clearly had no idea. I mean, go online. You can go and find those little cars that kids drive around in. They take 8 to 9 hours to charge overnight.
Totally the same
look,
thing.
The point about it is not whether electric vehicles are good or bad. In fact, they have a role to play increasingly in the vehicle fleet of Australia over the next decade. The problem here is Bill Shorten doesn't understand his own policy. And in typical Labor fashion, they want to ram it down the necks of all Australians. So the cheapest car you can currently buy as an electric vehicle presently, my understanding is, including all on-road costs and all the rest of it, is about $45,000 to $50,000 a year. That's the cheapest car Bill Shorten wants to make available to you to buy in the future. And I'll tell you what, it's not going to tow your trailer. It's not going to tow your boat. It's not going to get you out to your favourite camping spot with your family. Bill Shorten wants to end the weekend when it comes to his policy on electric vehicles, where you've got
Just a killer line. And it's so funny because that was prepared. Bill Shorten wants to end the weekend.
Australians who
Bill
love
Shorten
being out there in
loves
their
weekdays.
four-wheel
That's
drives.
all
He
he
wants to
lives
say,
for
see you
work.
later to the SUV when it comes to the choices of Australians. And this is fundamentally the difference between us and Labor when it comes to these issues. Have no problem with the adoption of these new technologies, and we facilitate it, and we're part of it. But what Bill Shorten wants to do, without seemingly even understanding what his policy does, is trying to drive people into these decisions. And his policies simply don't have the backing to explain how he will achieve these targets. I'll give you an example. He still is not...
Does that sound familiar? That his plan does not have the backing to achieve these targets? What does that sound like that we've heard recently?
explain what will be the impact on petrol and diesel excise revenue over the next decade. I mean, the net take out of the excise is about $11 billion a year. So, Bill...
That's probably enough of that. It is, I mean, the thing that I was hinting at that he gets to there is, this came from Sean Kelly, former Labor staffer, now writes for the Sydney Morning Herald and has a book out about Scott Morrison that I haven't read yet. But he said today, I realise this is subtle enough not to register on the debate. But today, the Prime Minister is implying that his attacks on EVs were fine because advances in technology could not have been predicted. But that's also his whole climate change policy, that advances in technology are inevitable. Funny that when it works to your advantage, you know, we can depend on technology. These things will happen exactly as we like it. But when it comes to attacking Bill Shorten, it's a bit different, isn't it? So I thought The Guardian's Sarah Martin was very, very good at this. And I think this is a great, it's a great rebuttal to some of the ideas that you hear about, like people in the press gallery, people writing about politics not calling them what they are. Here we go. So she talks about the 2019, what we just saw then. And, so he said, when presented with remarks he made on 2GB, he said that his position had changed in line with a massive change in technology over the last few years. In a warm-up for the election campaign, Morrison has been on the ground arguing for choices, not mandates, and technology, not taxes, saying Labor has a plan to force Australians to do things they don't want to do. I don't have to tell them to get rid of the car they've got now. That's what Labor wants to do. I'm not going to tell them to put up the price of petrol on families, blah, blah. We're not going to tell them what to buy. We're not going to tell them where to drive or where they can't drive. Nor will Labor. Quite a feat, really, to launch a scare campaign on Labor policies that don't exist yet. After telling voters that government support for electric vehicles would upend their very way of life, Morrison is now hoping he can peer under the bonnet of one and be accepted as a genuine convert. It forms a part of a broader pivot on climate change policy that seeks to erase from the collective consciousness a decade of coalition fear-mongering on emissions reduction tasks that the Liberal National parties have unapologetically and repeatedly used for political gain. Morrison is cynically relying on a disengaged electorate to get away with the conversion, as the government, or more accurately the government pollsters, acknowledge that the jig is up. After a decade of inaction and denial on climate change policy, there is much catching up to do to put Australia on the path to achieving carbon neutrality. Since net zero commitment, his EV strategy appears to be nothing more than a box-ticking exercise for a policy area that most coalition MPs would go away. It appeared that Morrison's political conversion on climate policy would actually translate to doing something about it. Doing nothing, remember, is the Australian way that Morrison prefers. Yow! Yeah! Yes, girl! Yes, queen! Sarah Martin, get his ass! I mean, it's all true. Like, we know that stuff is bullshit. We know that it's a policy that says it does more than it does. And there's no point pretending otherwise. There's no point being, like, this, like, along with other schemes that he has run the past, that often don't even pay out all the money or do all the things that they want to do because they've been designed in a way to make sure that it sounds like a lot of money but doesn't end up being used. It's just like, yeah, I don't know. So I have this, I mean, this isn't a surprise. This isn't revelatory, but I've just been looking at the things that Scott Morrison has been doing lately and just seeing him tick off things that it's like Scott Morrison has a bunch of things that he realizes are important for the election. He realizes that he needs some kind of policy on the environment. He couldn't go to the next election and be attacked with the idea that he was not doing anything on the climate. So he got net zero by 2050. We have no idea about the actual, like, deal itself. We have no idea about the actual, like, there's no real, there's nothing that will means that he actually has to hit it. It's just a promise at this point based on modeling we haven't seen. But regardless, it's there. He's put it out, so now you can't say Scott Morrison doesn't have an environmental policy. So that's one thing. The second thing is he's now come out with his EV vehicle policy, which links into the environmental stuff, but EV is something on its own. Electric vehicles are quite popular. It's obviously it's a bit of a wedge issue for him. Like, you know, he can't be too pro EV because, as you've seen, like, this government has set themselves up a test to be like, well, we can't put our finger on the scales to be too pro EV. So he's got to deal with that. But also, like, he also knows that they need to, again, if they can do something, it means that they kind of neutralize that as an attack. So these things are coming out now. And why they're coming out now? Because it's November 9. We're just about to go into a summer period. And I want you to think about how much news content you've consumed lately. How much attention have you paid to news headlines and that kind of things? I mean, I work in the news, and even I've switched off a bit.